All right. Welcome back to Dr. America. I am your host, Dr. Sanjeev Sriram. And for this next part of the show, I want to talk about the impact of gun violence on child health and to once again keep the focus of gun violence in a public health framework and what we can be doing as Americans and as communities to protect our kids from guns. And in order to guide us through a lot of important statistics and policy updates, I'm really excited about our next guest. We have Jenny Lintz from the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. And since 2005, Jenny has been working to keep families, schools, and communities safe from gun violence. At Brady, she oversees public health and safety campaigns, including the Asking Saves Kids campaign, Speak Up, and Suicide Proof Your Home. These proven programs provide simple, empowering solutions that shift dangerous attitudes and behaviors and save lives. Through partnerships with leading health, education, law enforcement, and media organizations, Jenny manages the national implementation of these campaigns as well as community-based programs. In addition to her experience managing nonprofit organizations, Jenny taught elementary school in the Bronx, New York, practiced family law in Chicago, Illinois, and she's got great educational credentials from Clark University, Lehman College, and the Cardozo School of Law. Jenny, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so one of the interesting reports that the Brady Center published this year back in October was a report called The Truth About Kids and Guns. How and why did the Brady campaign decide to put all this together?
Well, mortality and injury data from the Centers for Disease Control and studies by various academics and other government and law enforcement agencies that we relied on for the report are available to the public, but they're not produced for a general audience. So as a result, media coverage is the primary way most Americans are learning about the impact of gun violence. And, not surprisingly, the media tends to cover the extraordinary school shootings and mass killings and not the ordinary types of gun violence that takes the lives of 7 kids and teens every day. So if we want to reduce gun injury and death in this country, we need to better understand where and how these gun deaths occur. And that's what we tried to accomplish with this report. Specifically, we wanted to put a spotlight on an aspect of gun violence that we think is overlooked, which is the dangers of unsecured guns, and encourage conversations about solutions that might exist outside of Washington, D.C., solutions that can be embraced by both gun owners and non-gun owners, regardless of their political views.
That's great. So let's dive right into the report. Like you were saying, I really appreciate how the data and the statistics are presented because it's presented as the facts. It's not sensationalized, and I think that it really brings it to the home front where people can kind of realize that there is everyday gun ownership that can be made safer for all of us and especially for our kids. But one of the things that I found particularly striking was that, not a lot of people know how guns compare to other leading causes of death for American children. What does the Brady research present?
Right. So for this report, we looked at the most recent available data, which at the time was in 2011, where we lost over 2,700 children and teens to gunshot wounds, and another 16,700 suffered a non-fatal firearm injury. As I mentioned, that comes to 7 kids who are killed every day and another 53 that are shot. Surprises a lot of people. Only motor vehicle accidents kill more kids than guns. That means more kids die from guns than cancer, from infection, from heart disease, every other cause except motor vehicle accidents. And for Black youth, for African American children, guns are the number one cause of death in this country, twice as high as motor vehicle accidents.
Wow.
So when we looked at these, deaths in detail, we see a common denominator that we feel is a real opportunity to reverse this trend. and that's unsafe access in the home, as you mentioned. There's something that we can do and we can start doing right now, because 60% of all those youth firearm deaths occur in the home. 85% of the youth gun deaths for children under 14.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah, so I guess, and that's, I guess, the other part of this is that, there are different risks for different chapters of childhood. And so, with when you talk about unsecured guns, you're talking about guns that are kept loaded and unlocked, or basically just unlocked, right? Or, did you mean
Yeah.
something else by unsecured?
No, the American Academy of Pediatrics advises that a gun should be kept unloaded, locked in the gun safe, ideally with the ammunition stored separately. So there's several kind of points at which a gun is that's kind of the ideal, and then as we kind of reduce each one of those layers of security, we have more and more of a risk. Obviously, a home without a gun is the safest home for children.
Right. Right. And coming back to the different kind of chapters of childhood, it sounds like toddlers have like a different risk profile than teenagers, and I was wondering if you could kind of like help us parse that out a little bit so that we can get a better handle on that.
Sure. So when looking at the differences between age groups, younger children, those under 10, those deaths are more likely to be the result of an unintentional shooting or homicide. This is probably a good time to highlight one of the real limitations of the data that we're working with, which also might be sort of surprising to most people, which is that medical examiners across the country classify these gun incidents, and they don't use a uniform standard. So, for example, if a 12-year-old finds a gun in the home that thinks it's empty and shoots his 9-year-old brother, that's generally ruled as a homicide in many parts of the country. So we have to be careful when we kind of separate out unintentional suicide and homicide, and know that those lines are pretty blurred, especially when we're talking about unintentionals. Nevertheless, 24% of, based on the data we do have, about 24% of all unintentional gun deaths occur among kids under 20, and 34% of gun deaths of kids under 5 were unintentional, compared to just 2% of adults 20 and older. So we know for the little ones, suicide's not an issue. As our children get older, older teens are definitely disproportionately affected by guns, and now we are dealing with the fact that suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people in this country, and guns are used in 40% of all those youth suicides. 82% of the time that gun comes from their own home or that of a relative. So, suicide, we've reduced gun deaths among children over the past 10 years, but suicide continues to kind of be an outlier here. When it comes to suicide, a gun is very lethal, right? So in 9 out of 10 times, it's going to kill you, versus 5% of things like pills and cutting. So based on the work that Harvard has done, there's a new energy to focus on how someone attempts versus why. Mm-hmm. Right? So as a parent, we were told over the years, look for the signs. How do you know if your kid is depressed? The reality is, for many, many young people, parents have no idea that their child's depressed. They're not in care. They're not being seen by a therapist. And, many young people, suicides are very impulsive, because we've all been teenagers and we've all done dumb things.
Right.
The problem is, when if you use a gun, it's much more likely to result in a death. And so, when parents think about safety in the home, we get a little sloppier sometimes as our kids get older, because we think they're more responsible, they can handle more temptation. Maybe we've taught them gun safety, and we tend to get a little lazier, and think about storage in a different way than we do if we have a 3-year-old in the home. But the reality is, the risk is actually higher for a teenager than it is for a toddler.
Yeah, and I really appreciate you, helping us through some of those national statistics. But what I found also interesting in the Brady Report was that when you look at it according to the states that have higher rates of gun ownership, the numbers go way up for, risks and for a lot of these tragedies. And I was wondering if you could highlight a couple of those, just because I think it's really helpful for people to understand, we're entering the holiday season and people are, kind of visiting state to state. It's one thing. I think like this is a important conversation to have, for the national picture, but I think for state pictures, it's important to kind of help us focus in a little bit. So, do you mind walking us through that?
Sure. I think, again, when our common sense, based on what we see in the news, would tell us that, the most dangerous place on earth is Chicago. But in reality, more youth die from guns rate-wise in Wyoming.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much any other state in the country. So Wyoming, Louisiana, Mississippi, these are states that have among the highest youth gun deaths. That's not necessarily homicide, right? That's primarily driven by suicide. So our analysis demonstrates that where there are more guns, there are more gun deaths. And so there's a neat little map in the report that kind of shows states with high gun ownership, and generally speaking, there's a pretty high correlation between high gun ownership and high gun death, which should allow us to kind of rethink guns in our society, because these are legal guns,
right,
that we're talking about here. These are guns that families bring into the home with the idea that they're going to protect our family. That's a good thing. That's a noble kind of thing. They think they're offering protection, but really these guns are the ones that result in the majority of gun death and injury to children, particularly, young children and the women in their home. So a gun in the home increases the risk for suicide, homicide, and unintentional for basically every member of the household. And we need, this report kind of made me think we definitely need to do a better job communicating the risks of a gun in the home, just like we communicate the risks of other dangerous things to our children.
Right.
Unfortunately, a recent Gallup poll tells us that we have a lot of work to do, because 63% of Americans believe that a gun in the home makes them safer, versus in 2000 when only 35% of people reported that a gun makes them safer. So, this is definitely an area that we could improve how we communicate the risks. Definitely, for many people, they think about guns only in a political context. And overwhelming majority of people never think about guns at all. If you're not engaged in political advocacy. So, we wanted to show this data, say, look, as objectively as we could, this data is very clear. This isn't about politics. A firearm in the home puts children and other members of the family at risk. And we need to have a conversation about what risks we're willing to take and how to mitigate them.
Right. You were describing how the American people have a noble intention of bringing a gun into the home, and then you were saying that 63% believe that a gun offers greater protection. I was curious about another statistic that the report describes, where I guess parents have a misunderstanding about their child's access to the gun, and that when the children were asked, we actually found the opposite. Do you mind walking us through the details of that picture?
Sure. So nationally, we know about 1.7 million children live with unlocked or loaded guns in this country. So that's a lot. So kind of why is that? And we feel that parents are generally making two dangerous assumptions. One is that their child doesn't know where the gun is located, right? So they've adequately hidden the gun, or if they find the gun, that they would know not to touch it. So the study that you referenced that we talked about in the paper looked at this conflict really between what parents believe their children do and what children actually do. According to this study, 76% of the children knew where the firearm was stored. 1 out of 3 of those kids indicated that they'd handled the gun, even though 22% of parents indicated that their child had never handled a gun, were contradicted. So, if everyone remembers being a child and finding something in your house and touching something that your parents told you not to, and we just can't think of a gun as any different.
Right.
There's lots of programs that have been promoted over the years, gun safety type education programs, which would potentially give parents a false sense of security that if their child's been told not to touch the gun by either the parent or a police officer or a teacher, that they won't. But kids don't listen to us.
Right,
That's part
right.
of what makes them children. And this risk is just too big of a one to take. And there's just, unfortunately, very, very little information about us being able to teach the impulsivity or the curiosity out of kids.
Right, right.
At work.
And I think, and that actually brings me to one of the things that I really love about the partnership between the Brady Center and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and that is the commitment to campaigns for safety that don't depend and wait for Washington or state legislatures to to help our communities. And one of those campaigns that I'm familiar with and that I'd like to introduce our audience to is the Ask campaign. So do you mind just sort of introducing it and how maybe it could be used this holiday season as our families are traveling around the country?
Yeah. So the Ask campaign stands for Asking Safe Kids, and as you mentioned, it was collaboration with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And it's based on a very simple fact that as parents, we do everything we can to keep our kids safe from harm. We use car seats, we put gates around our pools, we keep medicine and dangerous cleaning supplies out of reach from kids. And Ask hopes to inspire parents to think about guns the same way, to raise concerns and awareness about dangers of unsafe access to firearms and ensure that children can't come across a gun in another home. So it's very simple, deceptively so. We're just encouraging parents to ask if there are guns in the homes where their children play. Just as it has become common for parents to talk about, allergies that their child has or who's supervising them when they're online, parents can take an important step to ensure the safety of their home by asking if there's an unlocked gun in the home where their children play. If the answer is no, great, one less thing you have to worry about. If the answer is yes, to make sure that guns are stored, unloaded, and locked, ideally in a gun safe with the ammunition stored separately. And definitely as the holidays approach, many children are playing in relatives, oftentimes relatives that don't have young children, so might not have thought about the safety of their home in that way.
Right.
Different parts of the country, as you mentioned, where gun ownership is very high or maybe more common than in the East, for example. So we're encouraging parents to have this conversation. It's entirely up to them how this conversation goes. We give advice and tips, but we're certainly not dictating. It's whatever makes you comfortable as the parent, however you need to talk about it. And we found that most parents who don't have this conversation, it just never occurs to them. Or for some non-gun owners, they might feel uncomfortable having the conversation, and we just encourage them to do it in a non-confrontational way. Hopefully feel some comfort in the fact that 93% of parents we've surveyed, which includes gun owners, would not be offended by the question being asked if done in the right way. They understand that we're just concerned about our child's safety. And certainly there's a lot of discussion about this issue. It's becoming easier and easier to bring it up. It's on the news every day. So we're encouraging parents to take responsibility just as they do every day for their child's safety and ask the question.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all this wonderful information, and we're going to have a link posted for the Brady Report so our audience can learn more. And thank you very much for also taking us through the Ask campaign. Remember, guys, we just want you guys to be safe out there as you enjoy your holidays. So please, please, please ask your friends, ask your family members whether they have a gun in the home and how they're storing it, so that our children can be safe and can enjoy the holidays with us. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today, and happy holidays to you.
Thank you. You too.
All right. So when we come back, I'm going to have a couple of closing remarks for you guys. Thank you very much. This is Dr. America, and we will be back in a few minutes.